Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how you can change the subject of any formula. We're going to go through fairly basic ones and then we're going to progress to kind of harder ones. The main thing that I want you to take away from this video is that this is a skill, and so you're only going to get better with more and more practice. But hopefully by the end of this video, you're a little bit more comfortable with changing the subjects of the equation. Okay, so with this first example over here, y is already the subject and you're basically asked to make x the subject. So now you've got to get x on its own. The easiest way to do these questions is, or at least the lens through which I think is the best way to look at these questions, is focus on your variable that you want to make the subject. So in this case, we're focusing on the x, and then you want to look at, okay, what is attached to the x? Why is the x not the subject currently? The first thing that you want to do is you want to look for any elements that have been added or subtracted to that side with the variable. So obviously we can see that we have 2x plus 9, and so we're going to remove the 9 first. So we have to subtract 9 to both sides. So on the left hand side we have y minus 9, and on the right hand side we have 2x. So as you can see, we're obviously getting closer to making x the subject. Then you want to look at, okay, the last thing we really got to get rid of is the 2. Now the 2 has been multiplied with the x, so in order to remove that 2, we need to divide. So those will cancel, leaving you with y minus 9 over 2 equals x, and there x is the subject. So you want to use that as your focus, and then from there, kind of let that dictate what you have to do to make it the subject. All right, with this next example over here, we're given the equation P equals 2 lots of L plus B. Now, we're asked to make the length the subject of this equation or of this formula. And so that's obviously represented by L because it says L is the length up here. So we're focusing on the L over here. So whenever you have brackets, the first thing you want to get rid of, or whenever you have the variable in the brackets, the first thing you want to get rid of is any factors that are multiplied with the bracket. So not the b, but the 2, right? The 2 is the factor that has been multiplied with the bracket that contains your variable. So the first thing you want to do is remove that 2. Now the 2 has been multiplied with the bracket, so we're going to divide by 2. So on the left-hand side, we have p over 2, and on the right-hand side, those cancel to just give us L plus B. There's no longer to keep the brackets anymore because there is no factor. Now we're almost there. We just have to obviously remove the B. So now we're going to subtract B to both sides. And on the left-hand side, we have P over 2 minus B. And on the right-hand side, we have L. And there's the equation with L as the subject. Okay, let's look at this next example. What about when things are being squared, like in this instance? So we have 4m equals 5n plus 2p squared, and we want to make p the subject. So we're going to go through with the same steps. So first we're going to get rid of anything that's been added or subtracted. So obviously this 5n over here, that's on the same side, we're going to get rid of that first. So we're going to minus 5n and minus 5n. So on the left hand side we're left with 4m minus 5n, and on the right hand side we're left with 2p squared. Now don't worry about the squared just yet. Let's get rid of that 2. So because the 2 is being multiplied with the p squared, we're going to divide by 2. Make sure you divide every term by 2. So the left-hand side becomes 4m minus 5n over 2. The right-hand side becomes p squared because those cancel. Now the final thing you have to do, and it's always best to leave the squared to the end in this instance. So we're going to square root both sides. Because what happens is that square root undoes that squared. So what we're left with on this side is obviously the square root of 4m minus 5n over 2. The whole thing is underneath the square root, and what we're left with on this side is just p. And now p is the subject of the equation. All right, let's look at this next equation over here. So we have t equals the square root of L over 9.8. Now, in this case, we need to make L the subject. Okay, so this is our variable over here. It's underneath the square root. And so you can almost think of it as being bound by the square root. It's kind of being locked in this place because of the square root. And so in order for you to unlock that, you need to remove this this boundary, this square root. And in order to remove a square root, you need to square. So what happens is you square this side, but you also need to square the other side. So t all squared becomes t squared. Now on the right-hand side, when you square a square root, it kind of undoes that. And so what you're left with is everything that's underneath the square root. And so L over 9.8. Now, finally, we can see that L is being divided by 9.8. So we need to remove the 9.8. So we times by 9.8 to both sides. The left-hand side becomes 9.8 t squared, and the right-hand side becomes L, and now L is the subject of the equation. And that's that. So the best way that I can explain this to you without an example is always focus on what you're trying to make the subject. Focus on that variable, locate that, and even circle that variable, and then let that dictate what you need to do in order to remove everything that's around it to make that the subject. I think the biggest thing with these questions is do as much practice as you can. And that's the only way that you can really ensure that you're never going to be stuck with changing the subject. Anyway, I hope that helped. If you have any questions, leave them down below. But other than that, I'll see you in the next one.